Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I just ask for your understanding. My voice is still coming back a little bit, and I still have a little bit of the remnants of bronchitis. So if you see me pop a lozenge in and do a little bit of coughing, I ask you just for your patience in that regard. But before I begin, I just wanted to thank the board members of the Spiritist Society of North Beach for having us here today. And it is a pleasure to come in and work because we are all students before God in this world. But before I begin my talk, I wanted just to sort of ask you all, why did you all decide to come here today? Because I know it's not because of me. I know that's because perhaps somewhere within yourself, you have a desire to learn, a desire for knowledge, for understanding, a deep understanding of the meaning of life, of purpose, beyond just the physical realm, beyond the material realm. So it could be a rhetorical question, or it could be a question that someone can answer, though I don't have a mic, which makes bad for videotaping, but why did you decide to come here today?
Just based on the title, I thought maybe it would help break negative thinking patterns.
Just based on the title, I'm repeating just for recording purposes. So just based on the title, you thought it'd be interesting to learn to break mental patterns, bad mental patterns? Okay, good. Anyone else? No, that's okay. Okay, yes.
I'm a Reiki teacher, and it works with energies and habits and things like that, and just help flow through makes it sound interesting.
Sounded interesting. We have a Reiki professional here with us as well, and she said it sounded interesting. So I'm repeating all this back just for recording purposes since we are videotaping this talk. Mental habits, energies of life. It's an intriguing topic for sure. It's an intriguing title, I should say, and it's meant to sort of pull in the public a little bit. And I'll tell you that today we're not going to go in depth into how thoughts work. I am going to mention it. I'm going to reference several books of which I posted on the slides here that I do recommend you read. And several other books that might be mentioned here today as well. The Genesis, these are two of the books part of the codification of Spiritism, the Spirits book, the Genesis. Mechanisms of Mediumship, or Mechanics of Mediumship, depending upon which translation you prefer. It's still in the works. It is to be published in English soon. In lieu of that book, since it's not yet in English, I do highly recommend a book called In the Realms of Mediumship. It's talking about thoughts, waves, wavelengths, and things of that, and we'll get into that. There's a very good book that I did bring here today, recently translated into English. It's called Life, Challenges, and Solutions. Chapter 4 is where I derived part of my talk from. I really highly recommend a lot of the Joanna DeAngelis series of books. Now, Divaldo Franco is a well-known spiritist medium in Brazil. He has channeled / psychographed hundreds of books, a specific series of books from his spirit mentor called Joanna DeAngelis. She has a really fantastic series of books. I highly recommend them. You can purchase them online through Leal Publishing. They're now based out of Miami, Florida. And one other book, it's an educational book called Learning and Leading with Habits of Mind. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But when we talk about mental habits, I think we all more or less may know that we are creatures of habit. But do we know what are habits? Does anybody know what a habit is by definition? Repetitive things that we do and eventually become a habit. Yes. Anyone else knows what is a habit? How do you form a habit?
Maybe the easiest thing is for us in front of a situation to approach the situation. So we have a way of doing it, and it becomes a habit every time we are hit with this situation. We keep the same pattern of reaction.
Keeping the same pattern of reaction into certain situations. Very good. So according to, and this is part of the resource that I mentioned from PubMed, the National Library of Medicine, they define as habits, they're actions that are triggered automatically in response to contextual cues that have been associated with their performance. For example, automatically washing your hands, which is the action after using the toilet, that's a contextual cue, or putting on a seatbelt after getting into the car. Decades of psychological research consistently show the mere repetition of a simple action in a consistent context leads through associative learning to the action being activated upon subsequent exposure to those contextual cues. Really long. Basically means that if over years you form the habit of as soon as you're done using the bathroom, you wash your hands, or you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth, or you get into a car and without even thinking about it, you put your seatbelt on, or you get into work and you automatically turn on your fan and turn on your radio. Habits form within our mind, cognitively speaking. We don't even think about it anymore. It's a high level of functioning that us as human beings, we have this cognitive power where our mind no longer has to process that data anymore. We automatically just do it. It's a way so we can be preoccupied and process other things. It's just the way that our brain works. And the science has shown this already. And once initiation of the action is transferred to external cues, dependence on conscious attention or motivational process is reduced. That's what that means. That once you form the habit, you don't even think about it anymore. And that could be both really good and that could be really horrible. So for people that are smokers, if you form the habit of getting up in the morning and lighting up a cigarette, it's very difficult to break that habit because it becomes unconscious. Your body automatically does it. The same happens in a negative sense. If you habitually have the habit of yelling at your spouse for certain things, it's very difficult to break that habit. That's why relationships are such a difficult area for the vast majority of us, because we form habits, and when we get with someone else, they have their habits, I have my habits, and they come to clash. However, these habits are likely to persist even after the conscious motivation or interest dissipates. Habits are cognitively efficient because of automation, because they become automatic. So although it seems like it could be a really bad thing because we are so far progressed as a humanity, it could be really positive, but it can also be really negative. Just depends upon it. And this is just a graph showing how the habit works. It's just sort of a cycle. However, what's important to note from a Spiritist perspective is that we are a culmination of our acquired habits from one life to the next. So this is important, both from a scientific perspective, that modern day science and psychology recognizes our ability to do something, which we're going to discuss in a minute, called metacognition. But it's important for us to know that at the level that we're at, where we have evolved to, we have this capability. It's a power we have over ourselves we don't quite realize we have sometimes, or we don't take advantage of. That I am what we like to call God with a small g. I'm a co-creator of what's around me. But I want us to ask ourselves this question: what daily habits, mental or external, have I acquired? And are these habits good for me and others? So I want you to take a second, and if anyone's brave enough to mention one, but what are some of the habits you've formed through your lifespan? Sleeping late is a habit. Abigail.
Pray every morning. I have my little place when I sit and I pray. I open my books. You know, I don't know if you can consider that a habit.
Sure.
But I cannot leave the house if I don't do that.
Abigail's saying she's formed a habit of daily prayer and she cannot leave the house without doing that. What other habits think that you have? What do you do every day? With sometimes maybe you don't even realize you do it, but think about the things when you get up out of bed and you go throughout your house. What do you do every day that you take your dog out no matter what? You just kind of like second nature. You go get the dog, take the dog out. It could be negative too if anyone's brave enough to admit it. Yes?
I don't know if it's good. I'm a very detailed plan. I plan everything.
Plan everything. It's a habit that you formed, okay?
Make coffee every morning.
Make coffee every morning. Does anyone have the habit of every Sunday night eating a bar of chocolate? Does anyone have the habit of every time they talk to that one sister, before they pick up the phone, they see on their phone, they see the caller ID, they go, oh God, it's this sister again. Does anyone have that kind of habit? Or you see that one coworker walking down the hallway and you're like, you always avoid that person. Every time you see them, you go, oh, here comes trouble. A lot of times you think those things and you're not realizing you're thinking them. Now, I asked a question, not everyone answered. Is it because everyone is just very modest and wants to be private? Or Can you not think of something?
Well, every morning I get up and have coffee, and right away that's all I think about. And then my first thought mostly is that God is with every member of my family and takes care and is watching over them and is going to be a good day for everybody.
So you,
I try to interject that positive thought regardless of how negative everything can be around me and how I feel. That it's going to, I could put a bubble over everybody and just God's hands are over everyone and saying, please let it be a good day.
so like a daily affirmation / prayer every day that you get up. That's wonderful. Man, you guys are super evolved. Nobody has any bad habits?
I have bad habits.
Oh, brave soul. What is your bad habit?
When I drive and there is someone slow in front of me, I start creating this habit like I almost want to push the person in front of me. But then so I will find the most efficient way to go around that person. But when I leave the center and I go back home, it's like I can have the most slow driver in the world and I don't mind, I can stay behind that person.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it changes something in the way I think.
So Sylvie is sharing that on normally her day-to-day basis, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're behind a slow driver, you try to find a way to maneuver around them. However, the days that you leave the center, you feel less irritated. That's an interesting topic to discuss for another day, that your whole mentation is different on those days. That's interesting. When I asked the question about whether or not anyone has any bad habits and nobody wanted to share it, I don't say that to demean you. I say that to bring about an idea of how self-aware are we of our habits, our mental habits, the thoughts that we're having. Because ultimately what we're thinking about, we bring about. I mean, that's been published. I mean, there are gurus that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars on that premise alone. Our thoughts are things and they manifest in our lives. This is nothing new for Spiritists. This is not a new idea in general. This is an idea that's existed for centuries. But how self-aware are we? When I ask the question, what kind of habits do you have? If you couldn't think of any, it could be a sign that you or we may not be very self-aware. And that should set off a small little alarm saying, uh-oh, I may need to work on being more self-aware, perhaps keeping a daily journal, diary, especially if you're new at monitoring what kind of habits that you have. It's very advantageous for us to have some sort of journal, something to help us monitor, keep track. If you see your physician wants to know how your diet is. If he's a good physician or practitioner, he's going to ask you to keep a record of it, because most of us are not very good historians. We have so many thoughts going through our minds. But it's good for us to monitor those things, to be aware of what kind of habits. Because as human beings, as we were talking about earlier, we have this ability to think about what we're thinking about. We're known as Homo sapiens sapiens. We have this ability as human beings called metacognition. How many of you have cats and dogs at home?
I used to.
We love our cats and dogs and our birds and our fish, right? We love our animals. But how we differ from animals, we know in Spiritism that animals have fragmented thoughts, whereas human beings, we have constant thought. But also science tells us that we have something called metacognition. In simple terms, I'll explain what it is. The human species is known as Homo sapiens sapiens, which basically means a being that knows their knowing, and our ability to stand off and examine our own thoughts while we engage in them. Metacognition means increasingly aware of one's actions and the effect of those actions on others and on the environment, forming internal questions in search for information, meaning developing mental maps, plan of actions, etc., etc. We have this capability. Animals do not have this capability. At the level we've evolved to, this is a very high-functioning cognitive ability. Unless you have a cognitive deficit, whether you had a traumatic brain injury or you were born with some sort of cerebral palsy or something to that effect, you may not physically be able to do that, although the spirit is always able, but the physical condition could be blocking that. But how many of us spend our day planning things, our lives. The young woman in the back said, with intention, she gets up in the morning and blesses her home, her family. She already is setting her day. But how many of us, just by a show of hands, how many have a life plan? Goals, I should say. How many of us have short and long-term goals? It's very important for us to have short and long-term goals for us. It actually helps us to prevent depression, believe it or not, especially as we age, we go into retirement years, and we leave behind the life we used to have, and then we sort of like a rebirth. Divaldo Franco, one of the mediums that I mentioned earlier, he's a great and prolific speaker. He's almost, I believe he's reached the age of 90 now, and he seems more like he's 20 with the level of energy that he has. But one of the things he always recommends, and if you read and study Joanna DeAngelis' works and her psychological series, we'll see how important it is for us to set short and long-term goals for ourselves. That idea alone might seem so far removed from spirituality in a way. I feel like some people might think that. Oh, well, how is that related to spirituality at all? Because it is, because everything around us, appreciating the nature that's around us, having gratitude also means that we have gratitude for our very lives and we realize how precious our lives are. And our ability to pre-plan, develop plans of actions, mentally rehearse before performance. I'm sure Abigail and all of her students probably do this as well. Runners do this. Athletes are taught to do this. Surgeons do this. They mentally go through the motions in their mind of the surgery beforehand. It's metacognition. It's our ability to think about what we're thinking about and how we feel about those things and how others might feel. But research has shown us that the average person doesn't do that. We don't do it. Why do you think that is? Anyone? Why do you think we don't spend time thinking about our actions, or making plans for ourselves? Why don't we stop to reflect and meditate and reflect on our lives?
Go too fast.
We're going too fast through life. Mental laziness. Oh, that's a good one.
Think about it, you just want to do it.
Don't want to think about it. Just want to do it.
The way you've been brought up, like your family, your parents sometimes never taught you that you have to do all those things.
The way we're brought up.
Yeah.
The way we're nurtured into believing. It's a nature versus nurture idea.
Maybe we are not educated to think.
Maybe we're not educated to think. That's very interesting. We're not educated in the proper way.
Importance, we don't decide the importance of the action. Sometimes we don't think of it as.
Very important.
So, so we don't think it's very important, so we don't prepare for it ahead.
Bill's saying it's not important. We don't give it importance. We're not making a priority.
I think some people are afraid to. Because
Some people are afraid to.
some people have a fear of change.
Fear of change.
So that if someone should say, oh, what do you think you might want to do next year or something? Oh, same old thing, because they become comfortable where they are and are afraid to move on because it might mean having to work harder, having to move, having to make changes, like they're afraid of change.
Fear of change, fear of modifying things, fear of coming out of your comfort zone. These are all really important and valid things. And the mere knowing that you're afraid, to acknowledge that is our first step, to acknowledge where you're at, where we find ourselves right now. That's why we began our topic today with questions so we could self-reflect. Where are we at right now? An emotional, mental, physical sense. Where are we at? Where do we find ourselves? To know where we go from here. Self-awareness and also social awareness of oneself and our environment. That is a part of metacognition. This is the level that we're at in our spiritual evolutionary process and in our physical evolutionary process. This is where we find ourselves. In the book, Evolution in Two Worlds, that was psychographed by medium Francisco Xavier from Brazil. Don't believe it's in English just yet. However, the book is fascinating because it talks about our evolutionary process from the time we are like an amoeba and slightly before, all the way up until we reach Homo sapiens and everything in between. And basically they tell us that we learned through so many internships to reach the point that we reach now has taken millennia. So it's something for us to really to be grateful for, that we have this ability to metacogate. And something else that Joanna Deanne just reminds us of, yes, we have this ability to think about, to plan, to self-reflect. However, because through many lifetimes from one to the next, we carry a lot of those mental habits with us from one life to the next. So if you have this habit of thinking negatively or treating people a certain way or having certain beliefs, we carry that with us from one life to the next. Unless we've learned in the interim, but generally we carry a lot of those habits. That's why it's really not necessary, except for very few exceptions, to do past life regression. If you stop to reflect about yourself and the instinctual reflexes that you have, the habits that you have, you can find out who you are. What you're drawn towards, what you like, what you do, that's who we are. At least that's who we currently are. Joanna says, since the guidelines for behavior lie in thought, thinking correctly is the biggest challenge for anyone who truly desires victory. So to think correctly, balanced, is a challenge. Why would that be a challenge? Mental discipline.
Why do you think correctly?
That's a good question. What is to think correctly?
Don't all people think that they think correctly?
That's very good. What's your name? John. Do all people think they think correctly?
To a point, yes.
Does everybody in this room think that they think correctly? Sometimes? Majority of the time? Can anyone think of any moment in their life where they're not thinking correctly, where they haven't thought correctly?
When you have negative thoughts?
Yes. Has everyone had such type of a thought before?
Oh, yes.
So there's somewhere within our psyche where it needs a little bit of work. But I like what John said. Don't we all think we're thinking correctly? That's why becoming self-aware, to know the product that you're dealing with. Let's use it in these terms. In order for you to evaluate something, you have to first know the product that you're working with. What is the product that you're working with? What is it within you? What is it? What are you evaluating? What are we evaluating?
Yourself, your soul.
My soul? How do I evaluate my soul, myself?
Based on your behavior and your habits.
Okay, my habits, my behaviors, I'm evaluating.
The thoughts you have.
The thoughts I have, the feelings I have, my attitudes, the effect on others. How people see you. That's a tricky area too.
Because sometimes you think you are one way, but somebody else tells you the opposite. Sometimes it gets you like, oh really? Am I like that? And you don't realize you are.
So sometimes we don't realize who we are until we come in contact with others. That's why we are built as social beings. But going back to what John said, it brings us to this thought of, do we really think that we need changing? Do we have mental habits that need changing? That's a rhetorical question. Ask yourself, are there things, if we think we're always thinking correctly, well, do you even need to be here?
I heard an expression once and I loved it. It says, if somebody thinks that they've already arrived, they have a pretty long distance to go.
If someone thinks they have already arrived, they have a pretty long distance to go. Wow. That couldn't be more true. And that really is doing the tango with something called pride. and not realizing. And I say that, and when I say pride, I don't use that word in a demeaning way. I say that pride, ignorance, because we don't know that we don't know. Because when you know, you change, and there's a Buddhist saying that knowing and not doing is truly not knowing. And all we can do is observe our lives. That's why pain is so phenomenal. It's wonderful. I know nobody likes pain. When you have a headache, you pop a Tylenol or a Motrin, whatever it is. Who likes pain? Anybody? No, unless you're a masochist. Nobody likes pain. It's not desired. Nobody goes out to hurt themselves unless you're mentally unstable. Nobody likes it. But by show of hands, who realizes that pain is good? Why is pain good?
Makes you change.
Makes you change.
A wake-up call.
Wake-up call.
Doing something correctly or for different reasons.
In the physical body, in order for us to know what's going on with us, we need to have that physical sensation of pain. Otherwise, we would die.
But we are in a society that not prepared to feel pain.
Not prepared to feel pain.
Goes into abuse substances or ways
Abuse substances.
to really forget the pain, to avoid the pain.
So what I'm hearing you say is that as a society, there are a large portion of people that don't know how to manage pain or emotional pain, so they turn to substances, which could be drugs, alcohol, or food, or other behaviors that are not conducive to a healthy mental state. It could be abuse of sex, it could be abuse of food, it could be abuse of power, it could be anything that we are using badly, I would say. Something for us to really think about. The journey, talking about a journey, it's not going to be an easy one. A lot of times people believe that, oh, I'm embarking on my new spiritual journey and I'm going to be like a blissful monk and be calm all the time. It's really not how it is. We have our moments and our clarity, but it's good for us to anticipate that there will be challenges within ourselves. Challenges because of old habits and behaviors. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the mechanism of thought. In pharmacology, when they talk about drugs, they talk about the mechanism of action within the body, how it works, the cascades, and how the body reacts to that said medication. Well, in Spiritism, we have something similar. We have the mechanism of action for how our thoughts work. Again, I premised this talk by stating we're not going to go into depth about how all that works. That's a lecture for a different day, and I could come back and talk about that another day. Today is just a little hoping to pique your curiosity about this because it's very interesting. How many of you know how Tylenol works in the body?
Bill.
When you look at me,
Okay.
I'm not a pharmacist.
We do have a pharmacist in the back.
Doesn't it block the pain receptors?
Yes. Yes. In general, they're blocking pain receptors. There are other drugs that work differently in the body as well. Right? So, does anyone take any particular pill that they're not really sure how it works in your body, but you just know that it does something that has a positive effect? How many of us have ever taken a medication where we're kind of like, yeah, I know it does something, and my doctor says it does something good. Okay, all right, that's fine. It's good for us to know what we're putting in our body and what it does. It's really important. There are ways in which you can read and study about it so you know how it works in your body. One of the parts of what I do as a nurse is I educate patients that have low levels of education, but I tell them this is how it works in your body. Because if something is off in some area, you're going to know it could be related to your medication. It's important for us to know how things work. That's why it's important for us to know how our thoughts work.
Can I just say something?
Yes, Leah.
Because we're talking about the medicine.
Yes.
And we know that our bodies are all different.
Yes.
So how come we can prescribe the same quantity of medicine to everybody? Like you just go and buy a pill, ibuprofen, and you say that, okay, my headache is going away. But it may be different people
people will have different reactions.
Yes.
How come you can have the same quantity to prescribe to everybody, you know?
Right. So it's the body's chemistry. I'm going to say, give you a general response, not wanting to get into too much in depth. Everybody's body chemistry is very different.
So the medicine should be different.
So it's tailored to each person. Yes, so it's tailored. So as a general whole, and again, not wanting to get into pharmacology, because it wasn't my area of expertise, but in your primary care provider, that's something that they're going to be talking to you about, at least with prescriptive drugs. Now, if we're talking about Tylenol or Motrin, which is over-the-counter medication, some people say, oh, 500 milligrams works fine for me, I could take that, I feel good. Some people are like, nope, I need 1,000 milligrams, no doubt, that's what they always take. It just depends upon the person's chemistry. Is it mind over matter? Is it just the person thinking that's what it is? It could be the degree of pain. And I think this is applicable also to the mechanisms of thought in a way, because for everyone, how you think is very differently, and each person is very different. So you need to tailor it to how it fits you. However, the mechanism action for thoughts, and thank you, Leah, thank you everyone for giving your feedback. I think it's really good. It's important for us to know our mechanism of action in our thoughts. In the book, The Genesis, chapter 14, item 14, says that we spirits act upon spiritual fluids, not by manipulating them as men manipulate gas, but by the aid of thought and will. Thought and will are to the spirit that which hands are to man. By thought, they impress these fluids into such and such directions, referred to as idioplasty, something you can study and learn about in the book In the Realms of Mediumship. They agglomerate them, combine or disperse them. They form harmonious wholes of them, which are definitive appearance, form, and color. They change the properties of them as a chemist changes those of gas or other bodies by combining them, by following certain laws. So just a little diagram of how it works. So us, the immortal spirit, because we have continuous thought, through the use of the universal cosmic fluid, which is what we are immersed in. Again, remember I said this talk is not to go into depth of such things. If you want to come back another day and talk about it, but you can study and read more about this in the book, The Genesis, if you're really interested in the science behind it all. Through our condensed thought, meaning constantly vibrating, thinking about a specific thing, we can saturate our paraspiritual molecules and have a materialization of those thoughts. So, in essence, something called idioplasty. And recently we had a physician from Brazil talk about specific cases he had experienced where he worked with idioplasty, which basically, if you think about it, if you sit and think about a certain thing, negative or positive, it can come to fruition. It could physically happen. Now, I'm not talking about it, okay, Kirsten, I want to materialize a Rolls Royce. I'm just going to sit for a few days. Not quite. However, in theory, how many of you know about the Indian wise man, shaman, Sai Baba? Okay. Sai Baba, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, because I grew up hearing about this man from India. He was able to materialize things right in front of people, literally pulling it out of thin air. There were videotapes of him, people that went to study him. There were papers written about him. Many famous people went to meet him, and they found out this guy was not a fake. I mean, hundreds of thousands of millions of people know about him. There are books written about him, scholars that went to visit him and study him. They have no idea how this man was able to do this. He wasn't a charlatan. They were able to, hundreds of people were able to determine he was not a charlatan. How was he able to do that? He had a high level functioning of this. Something for us to think about that later on in our existence, some place and time, we would reach that point. But for where we are at right now, we know already medical science says that your emotional state and your feelings affect your physical body. We already know that. It affects the endocrine system, which thereby affects the hormones that are raging through your body, and it affects how we feel. This is not a new finding. This is not something, crazy. This is medical science. Your emotions affect your physical body. What we think about manifests in our body. We already know that depression can affect our physical body. People feel physically ill, lack of energy, they feel pains. We already know this. So it goes back to when I asked you, do you know how Tylenol works in the body or other medications? If we know how something works, we can utilize it to our advantage if we choose to. But remember, I started out by saying that research shows that the average person doesn't use metacognition. They don't plan things. They don't think about what they're thinking about and how it could affect them and others and their environment. The average person, and I don't know who is considered to be the average person, as John said, you know, who are these people? Who thinks they don't think correctly? Who are these said people? Who are they? Are they not us? Are they not? Are we taking advantage of the knowledge? Every day are we getting up and saying, no matter what has happened to me in my past, I want to cleanse myself moving forward. I want to work on myself. I'm setting that intention. Are we doing any of those things? Because Joanna says that through many incarnations, as I mentioned earlier today, through many millennia, from one life to the next, we create habits, both physically and emotionally. I'll give you an example. Who had breakfast this morning? Oh, you didn't eat? No? Did you have breakfast? Did everybody have breakfast this morning? Yes. Everybody ate this morning. After you ate, did you have to tell your body, your pancreas, and other organs in your body and your stomach to release enzymes to digest? Did you have to do that? Did you have to flip on a switch? Did you have to take anything? Did you have to do something to your stomach for it to begin peristaltic movement, which is the movement through your intestines, for it to push along the food? Did anyone have to do that? You had to do that? You had to manually do the peristaltic movement?
No, I didn't have part of it, but no. I might have misunderstood what you were saying. I take an herbal product. I have gastric reflux.
Okay.
So I had gone through the traditional ways of doctors and everything of trying to help with the problem. And as life went on, it got worse and worse and worse. And they put me on stronger and stronger medications that were expensive, that did not work, and that were harming my body. So I sought out an alternative source, vetted source, that I take something that
helps with reflux.
To digest, to prepare my body for coughing, for instance, because it's highly acidic and I like coffee and everything. To put on the esophagus, coat the esophagus, and get ready for that. And then when I eat something, after I eat it, I take a supplement that's called Digest. So it helps.
So there are people, and there are people that suffer. Yes.
More of a,
enzyme. Yes. So there are some people. There are people that suffer from a disease called cystic fibrosis and other diseases as well that need to take certain enzymes, digestive enzymes. So there are certain circumstances.
You may not have meant it in that way.
No, not necessarily, no. But I mean like everything else that's automatic, your heart beating, unless you have an assistive device that makes your heart beat. Most of us don't have to think about that. You don't have to tell your central nervous system to react a certain way, it just does. If a burglar comes into your home, you're going to have a response called fight or flight. It's an automatic reaction. But those reactions in your physical body, your heart beating on its own, your stomach doing what it needs to do, that all happens over many centuries. These are called automatisms. You can study more about them in Evolution in Two Worlds. However, in the same context, from one life to the next, we carry many mental habits that Joanna talks about in this book, Life Challenges and Solutions. She says that humans carry mental habits deeply imprinted in the inner recesses of their intellectual learning experience. These mental habits will guide their conduct from then on, and all existential programming starts with thought. So for millennia, for hundreds of incarnations, you've been dragging with you mental habits. That's why it's so difficult to change. That's why when we're dealing with patients that suffer from addiction, for many reasons, one of which is this: it's very difficult to come out of an addiction. Very difficult. Not strictly because of the physiological and biological responses to the actual thing itself, but to the mental, emotional, and I would say reincarnatory aspect of that person. Many times, addicts were previous addicts in another life. This is not, opium has existed for centuries. This is not the first century that it's existed. We've known that there have been hallucinogenic drugs that have been used for a long time, dating back to Native Americans and in times of Egyptian times. So we carry those habits from one life to the next. How to break the pattern. Hopefully, you're born into a family that will morally educate you about life, making wise decisions. But a lot of the time we're born back into families that we already have issues with and have the same issues that we have. That's why a good number of the patients that I deal with have addiction issues. And it's astounding every time I come to find out that a mother or father shares their addiction and they do the act together. So, and that was a particular case I had a number of years ago where we were working and this particular gentleman was doing really well with combating his addiction. He was going to therapy, he was doing everything he should do, but he kept falling back, which is common, but for some reason I had some sort of intuition that there was something else I was missing. So one day in conversation, I asked him to come to the office. I wanted to sit with him and talk with him face to face. I thought, well, maybe I could get something if I see him physically, because a lot of what I do is telephonic. So that particular day, he brought his mother in with him. And then it was so apparent when she walked in with him. Although in that moment, he was sober, but she clearly was not. So, and through an hour-long discussion, he finally mentioned in passing, not thinking anything of it, that his mother shared his addiction and that they often would do certain things together. And so that, and even unbeknownst to that particular patient, he didn't think that was a significant thing to tell his therapist or to tell myself, his case manager. But it is, because when you have people around you, it makes it more difficult. It is a long, challenging, but what the good spirits mentioned earlier before, what we mentioned here on one of our slides, the willpower, the desire to get out of it is what makes all the difference. They have to want to change. That's what makes the difference. Because you could be surrounded by people that are doing things that are not good, but your singular desire to get out of that is only that which can save you. There's a really good book called Liberation. It's part of the series of books called Life in the Spirit World, or Spirit Realm, Spirit World, by psychographed by Francisco Xavier, by the Spirit Channel book, by the Spirit Andrea Louise. The book is called Liberation, and in it, there's a particular, this particular book gives an account of life in the spirit world of this particular low-level spirit who was very smart. His name was Gregorio. Gregorio was highly intelligent, was able to manipulate, not wanting to go too long into this story, manipulated a lot of people into doing what he needed to do and doing a lot of evil things, let's put it that way. He had been doing this for a very long time. I'm talking probably maybe a couple of centuries. And his mother, who had been watching over him for a very long time, always waiting for the moment for him to change, to want to get better. Because the issue was, it's not that he didn't have support. It's not that he didn't have a slew of people wanting him to get better. He didn't want to change. So guess what? He didn't change. And God does not force our will. When someone wants to and is ready and has come to it, they will. But in their time, not ours. It's a singular, most difficult thing to deal with when we're dealing with other people. And that's whether, patient to caregiver to, partner to spouse or mother to child or parent to child. We cannot force another being to change. Cannot. God himself does not do it. But we have this idea in our mind that we need to have that. Joanna DeAngelis, in the book Family Constellations, she says that when you look at your cat, Do you expect your cat to all of a sudden get up on its 2 legs, come up to you, embrace you, and say, "How was your day today? Tell me about it"? No, you don't expect that. You expect your cat to come around and rub your leg and, swirl around you and meow a bunch of times till it gets what it wants. That's what you expect, right? So why do we expect other people to rise to the occasion of what we want them to be? It's the same thing. We're expecting something from someone that they're not ready to give. It's a sort of grieving process we need to endure. We need to grieve the loss of the image of the person or people in our lives that we want to be a certain way, but they're never going to be what we want them to be. So love them for who they are. And love yourself enough to know that we all carry these deeply imprinted mental habits within us. And when we begin our own journey and when we realize how difficult it is, you'll be more compassionate to others because it's hard to change.
Can I just say something?
Yes, please.
For me, using the key word right there, love yourself.
Love yourself.
So many people that don't love themselves, but there is another topic for another day. What is love? Bill and I in our gospel this morning had to go to the dictionary to see the definition of love that what came in our gospel. So maybe a topic for another.
And we're going to mention that today, that self-love is vital. Because if you don't feel that, what Bill had said earlier, some people don't make it a priority. If you don't make yourself a priority, that's not selfish. If you don't make self-love a priority, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to move. You'll be complacent for a while, but there will come a time where life will push you forward. Oftentimes that's because pain comes into our lives and kicks us forward. That's generally what happens. Talking about mental habits, we talked about the mechanism of how thought works, condensing in our paraspiritual molecules. In the book Mechanisms of Mediumship, chapter 4, entitled Mental Matter, they talk about something called mental particles. They say that thought is the essential agent, the living foundation for all accomplishments on the physical and extra-physical planes. Nevertheless, thought is still matter. We might not think of thought as matter, that it is a form of matter. Maybe not matter in the sense in which we understand it, but thought is matter. That's why it can condense in our paraspiritual fluids and come to fruition, because it is a form of matter. It is mental matter in which the laws of formation of magnetic charges or atomic systems prevail in a new sense to compose the marvelous sea of subtle energy in which we are all immersed. So there are these mental particles that are composed of, our thought has mental particles. It's kind of, does that seem abstract to most of us? Like it just seems so far off? Does that concept, does that seem a little bit, I remember when we first started studying this, it just seemed so abstract because it's not something, because you can't see, it's not tangible. I can hand you this cup of water and you can cognitively process it as a cup of water and you have a frame of reference. As a child, you saw different forms, different colors of cups. So you reference it to that you think about and you refer back to what you know. You say, okay, yeah, that looks like a cup. But if you have no frame of reference, if you've never been taught this, it could seem very abstract. So hello, welcome to the new idea about thought is matter. Thoughts are things. Thoughts can have both negative and positive charges. Could be good, could be bad. This is, when you break it all down, it makes a lot of sense. It seems like common sense in a way. But as my daughter says, common sense is like deodorant. We all should use it, but we all don't. It seems like it makes sense, right? When you really break it down into minutia, thoughts are energy. There are these mental particles. I have power over my thoughts, and those affect my physical body, and they affect those around me. Because this is what the aura is made up of. All the thoughts, the feelings that I'm projecting are these mental particles. Our halo or aura is woven from the subtle atomic currents of one's own thoughts. Edgar Cayce, the famous American seer, was one of the many things he could do, aside from being a somnambulist, is that he could read people's auras, just plainly, like this. He could see. And I was listening to one of his helpers at ARE from over a long time ago. I believe she's now passed on, but she was giving an interview saying that he was a marvelous person to be around. He's very jovial. And she said, out of nothing, if you were just around him, he would look at you and say, "Can I read your aura?" And he would say, "Well, I could see a little red spot right around here. You got into an argument with your husband earlier today, didn't you? You really should forgive him because it's going to make you sick. I see this negative emotions and I see these colors." So they are things. They are things. Thoughts are matter. We all just don't have the ability to see it yet. It's good for us to know how these things work.
That's why all the colors in our auras change constantly.
Yes.
That's how when you take a picture, that it is mechanism. I'm sorry, Dr.
No, go ahead.
You take pictures of your aura, but if you take today and take another one tomorrow, the color is going to be completely
change.
different. But people think, look at my aura. No, every second we are changing the colors of our auras.
Exactly. And there are people that will get a photograph of their aura or have a painting drawn of their aura, but it can change from day to day, from week to week. It can end up being really bad one day, but really good the next, depending upon our thoughts. I started out our discussion today asking you a series of questions. What are habits? What kind of habits do you have? You get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, maybe you eat something healthy or maybe not so healthy or somewhere in between. You go for a run that day, you take your vitamins, you take your enzymes, you take what you need to take. But how much time do we relegate for our psyche, us, the immortal spirit? What do we need? What are the needs of our psyche? Let's start. What are the needs of our body in order for you to live every day, to function? What are your needs? Aside from the medications that we need to take daily, what are your physical needs that you need to do every day in order to exist? Water. Fruit. Food. Air. Sleep. Appropriate amounts of sleep, yes.
Meditation is very, if we do,
Meditation. Do we need that for our physical body?
Yes.
You do?
Meditation, yes.
Yes, okay. Anybody else?
Moving exercise.
Moving exercise.
I know when you said meditation, an Indian taught me that a 2 minutes meditation. If you don't have time to do the 15, 30, you can do a 2 minutes meditation. And you can do throughout the day. I go over it. It is
2 minute
awesome.
meditation.
That's
Do you do that with Bill every day? 2 minute meditation?
He got it. He has a lot of meditation.
So we all can agree that you need water, you need food to sustain your physical body, correct? So what do we need to sustain our psyche? What are the needs of our psyche?
Sleep.
Good thoughts.
Good thoughts?
Connections.
Connection with what?
With God.
God,
Jesus,
okay.
Mentor.
Huh?
That.
Visual input.
Visual input. What kind of visual input? Positive or negative? Okay. Some people live off the negative. Some people do. They thrive off of that. It's a habit.
Sleep too, to be able to be balanced.
Sleep, to have a balanced psyche. Anyone else?
Mental particles? Mental particles.
Good or bad mental particles?
Nature.
Nature.
Of nature.
Okay. Nature.
Music.
According to Joanna DeAngelis, there are 3 things that we need to cultivate. And she says these things are as important, or just as important as water. So if you go without water for an extended period of time, your cells will begin to dehydrate. Your kidneys might begin to shut down. You're going to have a multi-system organ failure. And you eventually will die without it. Joanna's saying these three things, if you don't cultivate them, you are having sort of a mental psyche death in a way. You will be unbalanced. It is a need that we need to cultivate. Reflection, prayer, and meditation. I always like to create acronyms because when I was in nursing school, there were so many things to remember in a short period of time. We create a lot of acronyms. So I always like to remind myself, RPM, I need this daily, RPM. Reflection, prayer, and meditation. I need this like I need bread and water. We have to tell ourselves and remind ourselves of this because we will go throughout life on autopilot until we crash and something happens. And then we end up at our doctor's office, at our therapist's office, at a Reiki healer, at our Spiritist center, at our church, at our synagogue, going, why? What am I doing wrong? Where is God? That's why pain is good. Second to the power of God, think about God's power. Think about the power of God is immense. First in line, God's power. Second in line, pain. Second to the power of God, pain has the ultimate power to change people. So when God in his infinite love gives us free will and we choose to go the wrong route, God says, okay, I give you free will. But my friend, pain, will meet you on that road and it'll bring you back. Bill.
I was just thinking, I said before that visual input was a need, but I think more, I'm changing that to be sensory input is more important. All of your different sensories. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at jails with isolation, okay, or even some of the psychological tortures that they do, they remove all sensory input. Okay? And the only way a person can keep sane is by reflection, prayer, and meditation.
Yes.
Because there's no other input that he's getting whatsoever.
Yes. The greatest jail is our own mind. It could be our greatest prison or our greatest escape or the best thing for us.
There have been a lot of studies done on infants who were not touched. I believe there was one done in Russia in an
Orphanage.
And you familiar?
Yes.
And yes. And the babies for an entire year, they were given food and changed in physical needs, but no holding, no touching, really, except for necessary stuff. And they turned out to have some wretched psychological problems.
Yes.
Their psyche had been affected by
Yes.
that lack of touch.
Definitely. Especially during those earlier years, it's important that, formative years, it's really important that children and babies are given that love and that affection. And not wanting to go into a different topic because of time, but that's a very interesting topic to explore from a spiritual perspective and how, we are brought up in it's the old belief, nature versus nurture, that are we simply a product of our environment, or do we already have a nature within us that can develop and change on our own, independent of our physical circumstances? And from a spiritist perspective, we are not simply the product of our environment. In part we are, but we have choice and free will. And if we have a desire to change and to get out of, because there are certain circumstances and cases of people being born in environments such as that and coming out of it. And this is just one exception, and where I had a very good friend of mine growing up. We've lost touch because of various reasons, but she was born addicted to crack because she was a crack baby. Her mother was a cocaine cracked addict, and she was born going in withdrawal and all these things, and was in the NICU and all that type of stuff. She was adopted by wonderful people, raised by amazing parents. And later on in her life, her and I were discussing certain things, and she came out and shared it. She said it's not something she'd like to share with other people because it's very shameful. She doesn't like people even to know that she's adopted, and that's a whole other series of things. However, she said to me, Kirsten, I feel like now, as she's in at that time she was in young adulthood, she began to talk to people about it because she wanted people to know that just because you grow up a certain way or you're exposed to certain things doesn't mean that you have to be a certain way. So there is a possibility for change and to come out of those things. So that's why it's important for us to educate society, not just ourselves. That's why it's important to share the ideas of Spiritism, not to make other people Spiritists, but to help open their eyes to the possibilities of what lies beyond this physical realm, and that we are not simply a bunch of cells brought together, and that it is important that independent of our religious beliefs, anyone can practice these things. Reflection, prayer, and meditation. From any social, economical, or religious background, anyone can practice reflection, prayer, and meditation. It is as important as bread and water. Joanna says they are as necessary as physical nourishment for a healthy life. These three meet the needs of those having to do with the psyche. Oxygen maintains the body, while the mental wave sustains life. She goes on to talk about how important it is to be authentic and self-loving. How many of us can be authentic and self-loving?
I can be very authentic.
You form the habit. It was a great talk given by a very dear friend of mine, Susanna Simones from Florida. She's the president of the Spiritist Federation of Florida and of Conscious Living Spiritist Group in Miami, Florida. She's given a couple talks about being authentic and how scary that is. To actually say, you know what? To stand up here and admit to you guys, I don't meditate every day. There are days where I do not utilize my ability in metacognition. There are many days and weeks and months and years where I've gone by and I've lived on autopilot. And I say things to people that I regret. And then I daily can say, I look back throughout my day and go, man, why did I say that? Why didn't I do this? And then that complicates a lot of other things. I had a patient of mine pass away. I have many patients of mine pass away, every so often. And he was an addict, and he was around close to more or less my age. And I remember when he passed away, the first thought that came to me was, did I not call him enough? Did I not make enough time for him? There are a lot of thoughts that begin to go through your mind when you don't create the habit of discipline. There are a lot of other byproducts of that can occur. Guilt, when you're not disciplined. That's why it's so important to formulate mental discipline so we're not mentally lazy. Mental laziness leads to a lot of illnesses, both mental and physical. Believe it or not, it's not me who says that. I like to always refer to Joanna De Angelis, the spirit guide of Givaldo Franco, as a great psychologist and physician in my mind, because everything she talks about matches so well with modern day psychology.
What do you mean by
Being authentic, being true to who you are. Now, I'm not saying that we should all just be mean people. Well, I'm a mean person by nature. I'm just going to say what we're not saying give rise to that, but be true to who you are. Not trying to put on, most of us wear masks and we put on a face. John.
Getting back to that, do you think everyone thinks that they're authentic?
No, I actually don't. I don't think everyone.
I think that they're all.
So what does authentic, that's a good question. What does authentic mean to you? What does it look like to you, I should say?
But you're not fake.
Okay, so how does that transcribe into actions for you? Like what do you do daily to not be fake?
Well, I still think I'm authentic, but I don't think that I push that out on other people. Like if you did something wrong or something I didn't like, I don't think I would be authentic to tell you about it.
So that's a good point. That's a great point, John. And I'm glad you said that, because maybe I didn't express that. Everything that we're sharing here today is not to throw on other people. This is solely for our own self-reflection. This is not for you to say, well, Mary's not being authentic. Well, look at her. You cannot say to another human being, you're not being authentic, because you don't know. I don't know. I don't know your heart and soul. I know my own, or at least I'm trying to. I'm trying to be authentic. I'm trying to be self-loving. And my prayer for other people is that you find your own way to be authentic, in whatever way is true for you, because that looks very different for many different people. I had a patient who had full-blown AIDS and didn't want to tell anybody in her life. AIDS. And nobody in her life knew about it. Not even her children. She didn't have a spouse. Not her mother, not her extended family. The only people that knew were myself and her team of specialists. And we had counseled her, and she had actually moved out of state, so we don't know what happened to her. But can I tell her she's not being authentic? From a medical standpoint, we advised it was unwise for a series of different reasons, but I could not say to her, you're not being authentic. I could say, I like to be authentic with myself, and this is what it looks like for me. But it might look like something different for you or for somebody else. For her, that was the best way to find peace. We don't have the right to rob somebody else of their peace or to impose our belief on somebody else. We don't have that right. People do it. We don't have that right, and we will get into trouble. We will have problems in relationships. People will argue with us. It's not advisable. Yes? I'm sure there was a series of reasons, and she gave her reasons why she felt that way. And from as a medical professional, I can understand.
It's because of the stigma, the prejudice, I don't think it's a lack of authenticity, it's just a protection, self-protection,
And part of what I believe we should work toward is non-judgment for others. An acceptance of that's who they say they want to be, we should accept them. Love people for who they are, not what we want them to be.
And that's very hard.
And that's very hard. That is the journey of life. Accept people as they are, where they find themselves to be. And not what we anticipate. And we might find that we actually have unconscious anticipations for others. For example, if two people are walking towards this door, right, and you have an elderly person walk in front of you, how many of you would go ahead and open the door?
I work with seniors.
Okay. If you were far behind, if you were at the end of the hall and you witnessed that ahead of you and nobody opened the door for the elderly person, everybody walked and let the door slam behind them, what is your first thought, John?
I should have got there in time to grab the door.
You should have gotten there in time?
I said, you blind, why you didn't open? I could
There-
think like that many times.
Some of us
What's wrong with you?
some of us might think, well, why didn't they open the door? It would cross my mind.
Yes.
It would cross my mind.
So we first judge.
We judge. Because that's the level that we're at. But we don't know, maybe those two gentlemen or people, maybe they're going through a great suffering in their life right now. Maybe one of them was just diagnosed with a terminal illness. Maybe one just lost their parent, and their mind is somewhere else in the infinite. It wasn't there, and didn't even note that there was someone else behind them. So we don't know. Best not to judge. Best to do our best that we can do, and allow that, because every time we think thoughts, we're sending out energy around us to formulate our aura and those around us. So if we're constantly vibrating that, it's going to affect others. So if you're constantly vibrating negativity, pessimism, or you're around people like that, like it or not, you're going to be exposed to that and affected on some level. whether deeply or not.
And I think be authentic is be sincere and honest with yourself.
Yes.
Because if you want to be sincere and honest with others, you are going just to hurt people. Because people don't want to hear the truth. You know, so I think we have to be authentic and sincere, honest to ourselves.
First.
And not with others.
First. And truth is, in the book Happy Life, it's a little small book of messages from Joanna DeAngelis. As you can see, I like her a lot. And it's a psychographed book by the medium Givaldo Franco called Happy Life. And she says in it that truth should not be used as a weapon. But oftentimes it is, but it should not be. It should be used like a medication, given the right amount of dosages when appropriate. That is an art form. Because many people say, well, I'm being authentic. I'm just telling you like it is. This is what I see. Call it like I see it. That could be very painful for someone who's not ready to hear that yet. I like the story of the elephant, that there were 3 blind men, each of them holding a portion of the elephant. One was holding the tail, one was holding the trunk, one was holding the leg. And each of them were asked, what are you holding on to? And they described that was their truth. But neither of them could see the whole thing. So truth is relative to your experience, to what's going on. It's very relative.
I was going to say that to be authentic is not to be sincere. Sometimes you misunderstand the meaning of authenticity. To be authentic is to be yourself, to be truly yourself. So you're going to be sincere to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But it's not telling people what they have to do. I think that sometimes misunderstanding
Yes.
the meaning of authentic and sincere.
Yes.
They are two different things.
And they mean different things to different cultures.
Yeah.
So culture, and again, that we don't have time to go into that, so culture plays a large part into all of these things as well. Because if you go into the American society, well, I'll give you a personal example. Grew up in a Brazilian household where you were people that you greeted, especially adults, you greeted them in a specific way. You gave them a kiss on each cheek. You always complimented them. You said, hello, good morning, how are you? And if we didn't, we got, a lot of trouble when we got home. My parents always said, go say hello to Mrs. So-and-so. Go up and greet her, say hello. Always the person whose house, who, was the man of the house, owner of the house, we always had to greet them, say hello. And generally we would bring like a cake or something. So I remember being in the 5th grade, going to one of my girlfriend's house for the first time, believe it or not. I don't remember prior to that, but it was the most impactful experience for me because going to my American friend's house for the first time, and I walk in the door, and so she throws her school bag on the floor and says, hey mom, we're going upstairs. So my habit is automatic, where I go to the kitchen to greet the mother, and I go to go like this to kiss her, and she pulls back. And it was such an impactful experience. It never happened to me again. I never did that again, where I was like, oh wait, they don't do this. So it was very odd for me. So it's a cultural difference, but for me, I was being authentic to myself as I viewed myself in that moment in 5th grade, and as being sincere that I wanted to greet and give respect. But that wasn't the culture. So there are all those things that play a part as well. That's why when John mentioned something, it brought to mind the idea of respecting other people, knowing your role and knowing boundaries as well. That's another topic for another day. Boundaries and the roles in which we are very important to know.
Good, you're going to come a lot to
So if you go home and if you remember nothing from this talk today, I want you to remember these 3 things. RPM. Reflection, prayer, meditation. Find time for it in your day. Who has more than 24 hours in their day? Anybody? Anybody have 25? No. We all only have 24 hours, from the billionaire CEO to the low-level or low job paying level people. We all only have 24 hours. We need to manage our time and make time for this. Most important, something that Bill said, some people don't find it important. Well, we have to believe in our own potential to accomplish certain things, to do things. We simply don't always believe in it. You know, John multiple times today had said, well, don't we all think we think correctly? Don't we all think we're authentic? Maybe. Do we all truly believe in our own potential? If some of us have formed that, that's awesome. If we all believe in our potential, fantastic. I'm happy. I truly am happy because I know that you're on the right path to accomplishing greatness within yourself because you've reached that. Because only in believing in our own potential and putting the effort to express it, despite our obstacles, can individuals successfully complete their inner journey, their self-discovery. Creating a habit of daily reflection, whether we're reviewing our day, taking an account of our thoughts and actions, whether through journaling, creating a habit of meditation. If you don't know how to do it, I tell you, there's so many YouTube videos out there on meditation, how to do it. There's guided meditation, there's visualization. It's just a matter of making the time for it. Creating a habit of prayer and practice of daily prayer can only benefit us and those around us. There's plenty of research done on how gratitude, how prayer, and all the positive effects in our body it has. It has positive health effects for us. It can only benefit us to do what? RPM, what does it stand for? RPM, reflection, prayer, and meditation. Yes. Perhaps some of us do those things already. We reflect daily on our lives. We pray throughout the day. Maybe we meditate. Later, Abigail's going to talk to us and teach us about her 2-minute meditation.
I can do it before going in.
Sure. That is all that I leave you with. The importance. Because remember, I said, today was not to talk about the mechanisms of our thoughts. Just a small little tidbit into how it works. That we have power over our thoughts, our emotions, our day-to-day lives. So much so, and talking about mental illness, again, is a topic for a different day. For those of you who are saying, well, what about people that's a topic for a different day? I won't go into that. But as a general whole, even those that suffer from mental illness, and Joanna talks a lot about that in several books, we need to start new habits, creating new healthier habits. She says that if we find ourselves feeling negative, because our emotions are the physiological response to old habits of mental reflexes, we need to change our thoughts, replace it with a positive one, until it becomes a habit. That's it. It takes work. I had a consultation recently with one of my patients, actually a couple weeks ago, and talking to her about something similar to this. And I said to her, you know, it's just going to be work. And she's complaining about this, and it's just going to be work. It's going to be work you have to do. I can't do it for you. I can call you every day and remind you and do certain things and take your pills and keep journaling. But it's the work that none of us can do for anybody else. We can only do it for ourselves. That's it. So I hope if you walk away today, remember nothing but RPM, and that you practice it. What is it? Reflection, prayer, meditation. It's as important as water and bread. Thank you all for the blessing.
I will open 3 minutes for questions. If you have a question.
You guys asked so many throughout my talk today. Thank you all for participating so much.
Or we can talk, a little bit after. She's not going to leave right away. So now Leah, that's going to do the closing prayer, disappear. Oh. But you have a question.
Did your RPM and your spirit lead you to your profession?
I think my profession was something so ingrained in me that from as young as 3 and 4, that's all I ever wanted to do was become a nurse. And my mother, who's a clairvoyant, said that when she was pregnant with me, she saw each of her children. So she says to us, her stories, that we appeared to her before being born. And I appeared to her in the form of an old-fashioned nurse with the hat and everything, with the wide white hat and everything, the nurse uniform. And she said, that's how you always appeared to me. And so, yeah. So my mother never said, oh, you're going to be a nurse. But when I remember being in like pre-K, I remember as if it were yesterday, literally, it's so ingrained in my mind, sitting on my mother's lap and putting on a poster board pictures of nurses and Band-Aids. And I always would say, I'm going to be a nurse. And it was never a question to me what I was going to be. It was so ingrained in who I was. In the neighborhood with the kids, I always like to be the one to put the Band-Aids and to put like the Neosporin, you know, I would get my little kit out. I literally would. I loved to do that. Yeah, so it's part of who I was. It's a mental reflex from many lives.
You were talking about doing these things every day, and meditation, I have restless leg syndrome, and so I was, for years, well, it's under control better, but for years I wanted to be able to meditate, but as soon as the more you relax, the worse it is, you know. So meditating, so I started doing physical meditation, where like now I walk and I used to run, and it would be a habit that as I ran, I would think of energy going out to different people and sending prayer and energy to people.
Wow.
And so the pitter-patter of my feet kind of would be this rhythm, and it would be it's a very meditative time for me. So you can like meditate, a moving meditation with movement, dance.
Yes.
As you're moving, through the movement, your body is part of the meditation.
Yes. Thich Nhat Hanh has a really good walking meditation, these books and CDs on it. So definitely movement. People often think that meditation is static.
Yeah, that's what I was trying
yeah.
to that's what I was trying to say. Often we think of meditation as sitting and
Right.
you know, that kind of thing. But it's not necessarily.
Right.
It's anything that helps you come into yourself and into your mind.
Yes.
And to have that sense of peace about what your clarity of thought.
Yes. Painting can have the same effect. Yes. Painting, coloring, music. They have these mandalas now, the adult coloring books that are so popular now. And I actually do them myself. They're very meditative. I sit for an hour before bed and just color, or in the morning. It's very calming. It's very nice. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all.
Yeah, because that's what I was ready to say before we do our 1 or 2 minutes meditation. It is different types of meditation. And you are correct. You can do sitting, lie down, stand up, walking. We just don't recommend you do as you're driving or you pilot the plane or you go. So it's true. I mean, even to go to shows sometimes do that. It is meditation. It is so many different types of meditations of relieving pain, angry that you have inside us, as to calm us down.